All right, we're shifting from depression to the study of schizophrenia. And I asked you to watch two TED Talks, one on Ellen Sachs and the other on Eleanor Longden. And from Ellen Sachs, be interesting to see what you got out of that. But you see the onset of schizophrenia when she was in a young adult, and then just her delusions. She no longer made sense. And then her battle, how she was admitted and slammed onto a bed and put in physical restraints. And she talks about how terrible it is to be in restraints, that it's not helpful. And then how she went through the darkest times and with the help of medication, and then how she has to stay on medication. She's tried to wean herself off and she just relapses, and how she became a productive professor and can now speak out about her disease. So hopefully learn from that. And then Eleanor Logden, she had a different experience. Obviously, she was traumatized as a child. She talks about sexual abuse, and then how when she was in college during a time of a lot of stress, she starts hearing voices. And as people, instead of attacking the root causes of the voices, which was her, the sexual abuse in her past and her insecurities and fears, they just latched onto these voices, and she spiraled down into darkness. At one point, trying to drill a hole in her head to get the voices out. And so I hope you see the serious nature of schizophrenia, and just listening to people who struggle with it. I hope that opens your heart to those who suffer from mental illness. Okay, so looking at your note sheet, then hopefully you jot things down for those two women. And it talks about symptoms, positive and negative. So positive symptoms are symptoms that, because of the disease, you do these things that other people don't do. So delusions, hallucinations are examples of positive symptoms. Negative symptoms are when you lose normal functioning. So sometimes they say like a flaccid effect, which means that their face doesn't show emotions. They lose the ability to, so like when they become kind of immobile or unable to reason, those are negative symptoms. All right, types of schizophrenia. So, all right, just looking here at the PowerPoint, consider the most serious of psychological disorders. It usually starts in young adulthood and occurs gradually. Hallucinations, delusions, thought disorders, hear voices, delusions of grandeur. They're paranoid. They're pursued by the CIA, the FBI, KGB. They go from topic to topic illogically. You saw that in Ellen Sachs reading from her journal. Repeat words over and over, invent new words. Other symptoms: social withdrawal, loss of social skills, loss of normal emotional responsiveness. So those are all negative symptoms. Catatonic stupor, immobile, expressionless, coma-like state. So kind of like don't move and just mutter. 20% attempt suicide and 10% actually commit suicide. 2 million people suffer with it in the United States. All right, types. Paranoid. Delusions or frequent auditory hallucinations, all relating to a single theme. Convince there's plots against them. Usually less severe. All right, disorganized schizophrenia, incoherent in their thought and speech and disorganized in their behavior. Hallucinations are fragmented and unconnected. They're emotionless or have inappropriate emotions, can be silly, giddy, incontinent. So there's an example on page 427 in your textbook. A 40-year-old man was brought to the hospital by his mother, who reported that she was afraid of him. It was his 12th hospitalization. The man was dressed in a tattered overcoat, a baseball cap, and house slippers. He spoke with a childlike quality and walked with exaggerated movements. His emotions ranged from anger, hurling obscenities, to silliness, giggling for no apparent reason. So there's your emotion, inappropriate emotion. Since stopping his medication about a month prior to his hospitalization, the man had been hearing voices and looking and acting more bizarre. He told the interviewer that he had been eating wires and lighting fires. His speech was generally incoherent and consisted frequently of rhymes. Eating wires and lighting fires. Catatonic. So this is the negative symptom of lack of movement or loss of movement. May hold unusual, uncomfortable body positions for a long period of time. There's a picture of this in your book on page 428. Okay, maybe not. So obviously psychiatrists try to explain schizophrenia. So a psychoanalytic view, which I guess you just put under views on schizophrenia on top of page 5. So this is kind of like a Freudian idea. Your ego is threatening, causes intense conflict, etc. So, but Freudian explanations have gone out of vogue. Let's look at the biology here. Appears to be a brain disorder. Those who suffer from schizophrenia have a smaller brain and smaller frontal regions. They may also have a loss of synapses. So 3 risk factors for schizophrenia are heredity, complications during pregnancy and birth during winter. So scan, see there's some hyperactivity here in some regions of the brain and not enough activity in others. So you see that here as well. Too much activity. And then back here as well, or yeah, in some regions not activated as should be. All right, 1% of people in the population have schizophrenia. If one of your parents has it, you have a 10% chance of exhibiting it yourself. If both your parents have it, it's 40%. If your identical twin has it, it's a 50% chance. So obviously there is clear evidence that it's a genetic thing. Genetics make you vulnerable to schizophrenia. But obviously with the identical twin, if only 50% of identical twins exhibit schizophrenia, if their other twin has it, that shows you it's not purely genetic. If it was purely genetic, then that would be 100%. So there's other things involved. All right, so birth issues. If the mother has influenza during the 6th or 7th month of pregnancy, so that's a prenatal circumstance. So this is the respiratory flu. If you're born in the winter, so obviously that's an interesting thing. Maternal starvation or malnutrition can contribute. And we think that these things contribute to some development issues in the prenatal brain. Okay, so I have loss of synapses. And so we don't really know what's going on here. Looking at your notes, we just know that research evidence suggests that there are some risk factors, and it could be genetics that inhibit the growth of synapses in the brain. But we don't really know, right? That might be a reason why they have smaller brains, or yeah, there's just so much they don't know still. All right, the dopamine hypothesis. Those who suffer from schizophrenia use too much dopamine, although they may not produce an abnormal amount. So we don't really know here either. Is it hyperactive dopamine receptors, or maybe they have too many receptors? So thinking back to our conversation about SSRIs and treating depression, we looked at the neuron and the synapse and how the SSRIs delay reuptake for serotonin. And so there you saw serotonin receptors, right? So maybe people with schizophrenia have too many dopamine receptors, too much dopamine is going through some of the pathways. Still things we're researching. And then I have the central amygdala there too. It's not on the slide. So the amygdala is responsible in the brain for, some have called it precognitive emotion. It's just your brain reacting to stimuli in the environment. And so, like if, someone throws like a green rope on your shoulder and yells snake, like before you even look and process it's a rope and not a snake, you might already freak out, and your body's already releasing adrenaline, and that fight or flight response, probably flight, maybe fight, is taking over your body before. It's like it happens immediately, and that's in part to your amygdala. Like it's called precognitive, before thinking. Well, in someone who suffers from schizophrenia, uh, it seems like their amygdala is overactive. Like they're sensing fear. They're registering fear and panic, even though it's not. They don't really have anything to be fearful or panicking about. So an overactive amygdala. All right. Then the multifactorial model is kind of putting this together. Genetics create a susceptibility. So if you're genetically have a weakness for schizophrenia, then different things in your environment can trigger it. So maybe you have birth trauma that can contribute your risk. And then, of course, your family environment. So for Eleanor Longden, it was sexual abuse as a kid. That obviously was a partial trigger. But the key point here is environment alone is not enough. And I think genetics alone isn't enough either. So, yeah, so you need a genetic vulnerability, and then you need environmental factors to trigger it. So that's kind of the gist. Now, as far as treatment for schizophrenia, I posted an article on Moodle. I'd like you to read that article. It might be a bit difficult to understand, but that will talk about the pharmacology related to how we can treat schizophrenia somewhat successfully, like in the cases of Ellen Sachs. So make sure you read that.